Welcome to Conveyancing Matters with Lorraine and Stu. Join us for a chat about all things property.
Well, hello. Welcome to this Conveyancing Matters series on conveyancing process in other jurisdictions. And Stu and I are delighted to welcome Chris Fick, who I'm incredibly jealous has his own firm based in Cape Town in South Africa. So hello, Chris, welcome.
Hello.
Thank you. And hey, Stu, how are you doing?
I'm not bad, thank you, Lorraine. You okay?
Yeah, I'm good, thank you. So, Chris, it's really kind of you to join us. As I mentioned to you off air, we are. There's been lots of talk over here about, how grim the conveyancing process is, and we therefore thought it would be really interesting for conveyancers over here, Chris, to hear from conveyancers in other jurisdictions. So it's really kind of you to come on and talk to us. So to kind of ease us in, Chris, do you mind telling us just a little bit about yourself, how you fell into property law, and the firm you've got now and the type of work you do now?
Right, thank you. Well, how I fell into property law, I grew up on a farm in Overberg, which is about 120 kilometers east of Cape Town, and went to Stellenbosch University and then came to Cape Town. So during my articles, I had quite an extensive exposure to conveyancing, and that's really where I think the interest in property, land, and law met properly. And I then immediately got a appointment at another firm to be a conveyancer, and I just never stopped since then. And that was the end of 1978 when I qualified, and at Stellenbosch. So since end of my articles was 1980, and so since 81 I've been practicing conveyancing.
Oh, that's interesting. As I say, they used to be called articles over here. We've morphed into training contracts, Chris, now, and now they're going to be becoming qualifying work experience. But that's interesting, and to start with, really, because Stu and I have both said that we sort of fell into property work, and certainly when I did my articles, Chris, you do the job that's there for you in a way. And I worked for a good property lawyer when I did my articles. That's what I ended up doing. Was that a similar thing for you, or did you have a choice?
No, I suppose I had a choice, but I wasn't sure when I finished my studies what I wanted to do. And in articles, I think because of the extensive, I had 14 out of my 24 months of what now is called candidate attorneyship, basically, was in conveyancing, and I liked it. I got good at it, good training, and I wasn't particularly interested in litigation, and so that's why it stuck with me, and I enjoyed it then. I enjoy it now.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think Stu and I certainly talk about having that that very much contentious or sort of non-contentious sort of view of work, really. But Stu, so tell Chris about some of the highlights of the sort of the grim conveyancing process over here, and perhaps Chris can then sort of briefly walk us through a South African conveyancing transaction. But Stu, give Chris some of the edited highlights of what's going on over here.
Well, I think in England and Wales, Chris, there's a big movement from non-conveyancers to highlight the fact that the conveyancing system is, and I use the words, broken. That's the words that gets bandied about all the time. And I think in the main, it's the length of time it takes. Lorraine, wouldn't you say probably 99% of the issues that we talk about revolve around the length of time it takes? And I think typically here, last year, during the COVID pandemic, we were probably talking on average 20 weeks to get from the start to completion. And even now, we're probably talking around the 16, 17, 18 week mark. So the length of time is probably the one big thing that obviously not only our clients moan about, but all third parties to the conveyancing transaction, particularly the estate agents, really like to highlight and basically give us conveyancers a drumming over. So here, I think we're probably, you know, in terms of the volume of work that we do, I would say, Lorraine, what do you reckon in terms of between now and sort of between start and exchange? You've got to be talking at least 12 weeks, I would have thought.
Yeah, I would say so. And a frightening amount of that time, Chris, is spent on the due diligence, really, around, you know, money and source of funds and money laundering issues. And what really interested me when we spoke off air is that there's much sort of clearer lines, isn't there, in your jurisdiction between, you know, the lawyers have got different jobs. But Chris, can you perhaps take us, if someone in Cape Town decides they want to sell their house, what do they do broadly? Give us an overview of the process over there with you.
Yeah, well, they'll go to one of the agencies, usually. It's not all that anymore, but I would say 95% will go to a regular agency to give them a mandate or mandates, joint mandates to a couple of agencies to market and sell. Mm-hmm. There's been quite a movement by a group of attorneys, including me, to in fact get the lawyers involved more early, actually from the beginning, right? To say, well, okay, let me just get you the right agent, in my opinion. In some cases, sellers try and sell themselves through private property, which is quite a good website, second biggest website in property here, where they can register and get a pack and then sell it themselves. Been a couple of mishaps with that. So I with my clients, so I tend to tell them, if you want to do that, get me involved at a minimal fee. Basically, just hold your hand. Make sure you got the right details in there. You take the right steps. You don't describe your sectional title unit as IRF 3, 4, 5, 6, but actually as section 2 in the blocks. And so that's what we have with sectional and conventional here. Mostly the residential properties consist of that. And then when the contract is signed, the seller will nominate the conveyancer, usually. There's quite a bit of trouble or interference from agencies who prefer their attorneys to be involved, but it is a prerogative of the seller to do that. Of course, a purchaser can negotiate for his conveyancer to do the conveyancing, and then it's up to the seller whether he agrees to that or not. But yeah, usually the seller will appoint the conveyancer. Then we get the contract, and then we and obviously liaise with the client, the purchaser as well, and implement the contract for both parties, right? Sometimes we will have an issue with the contract and try and get it more clear about certain aspects before we actually jump into it. But usually it will just start by me making contact with both parties, get their documentation. From the seller, I'll also get the loan account number from the bank where he has his bond. So I'll write to the bank and say, listen, it has been sold. Please instruct your bond cancellation department to instruct your attorneys for the bond cancellation in conjunction with my transfer. And on the purchaser side, in most cases, that contract would be subject to the suspensive condition that the contract will only become final once a bank loan has been approved to make it possible for that purchaser to finance the transaction. So if there are no suspensive conditions, then the contract is final on signature, and it's just concluded with the process. The ownership will pass in the deeds office on signature by the registrar of deeds when we've handed in the documents at the registrar. But if there's a suspensive condition, when it's been fulfilled, it's also final. So we do not have a dragged out procedure in regard to legality or finality, really. It's a matter of going through the motions, making sure we get our reg clearance from the local municipality or the authority to get our receipt, transit receipt from the receiver of revenue, and then, if necessary, link up with the bond cancellation attorneys and with the bond attorneys for a batch of 3, basically, to lodge simultaneously. And we normally will lodge around about 6 weeks after the contract has been signed, maybe within a
And is
week.
the contract, sorry to cut across you there, Chris, so the contract is signed sort of, is it signed sort of with the estate agent, sort of really at the beginning when the seller and buyer kind of first do the deal? So if the buyer needs mortgage financing, as we would call it over here, rather than a bond, the contract will effectively be, what is that sort of generated essentially by the agent, and that will have a standard condition in it to essentially say it's conditional on mortgage financing?
Yeah, they have a template. You know, all the agencies put all options in there, and it's part of their duty really to also make sure that a contract is implementable, right? So in fact, the purchaser will have money to pay the seller. The cost must be declared, of course, clearly to the purchaser, so the budget can be prepared by him or her for that purpose. But there's normally about a 3 or 4 week periods from date of acceptance of the offer by the seller for the purchaser to apply to a bank or use a mortgage originator, which we have, who will apply to all banks, who get all the information from the purchaser and apply to all banks and see where they can get the best rate at which bank for this purchaser. And then the purchaser will accept the quote and advise me, and we just carry on. And I will then liaise with, as I say, the attorneys for the bank as a new bond bank, but it could be a different bank for the cancellation of the existing bond of the seller. So and that's how we do it. But it's controlled by one conveyancer, the transferring conveyancer, who liaises with the other conveyancers for those two aspects. There's not a purchaser, a conveyancer, although if there's anything that I would pick up that might be problematic and I can't sort out through discussions, negotiation, mediation, if you like, then I would just tell the purchaser to please get yourself an attorney to help you with this. Because
okay, so the one conveyancer essentially acts for seller and buyer, and the two lenders have their own separate representation.
Yes,
because we certainly wouldn't have that over here, would we, Stu? It wouldn't be that close in terms of the one conveyancer having control, Stu.
No, we would have a separate lawyer for the buyer and a separate lawyer for the seller.
Yes, I understand. So it's quite handy. I wouldn't mind to be involved with lots of other transactions as well, but we don't really have a problem with that. But we are also encouraging agents and our clients on both sides, seller and purchaser, to do a property inspection report, either by a home inspector or by a structural engineer, at least to cover for the purchaser's sake, to cover the 4 pillars of the structure of the property, the foundation, the roof, and the stormwater flow off, right, runoff. That must be right, and you can't always see it if you're an inexperienced purchaser. So it is not all that usual, but there's a strong, for the last couple of years, we're strongly recommending that to happen, and it might become compulsory to at least offer that purchaser the possibility. We like to offer it as well to all buyers, so to make sure that what we have a clause called the foot stewards clause in our contracts, which is a Dutch term for buying as is. All right.
Yeah.
You buy it as you see it, and then the difference between patent and latent defects to make sure that is also more put on the table. The seller will give a property condition report as well, declaring everything what can be seen, that can't be seen, what he knows about or knows of, to make it easier to deal with issues upfront.
Yeah, I mean that's certainly the similar principle over here, Chris. Caveat emptor is our term, let the buyer beware. But actually what's interesting is you've mentioned, and again we mentioned this off air a while ago when we chatted, that there are clearly parallels with English, the English process. And tell me what you told me about the land registration system in your area and why it's similar to over here.
Yes, I mean, obviously, when the Dutch colonized the Cape in 1652, there was first a Dutch sort of system, but it wasn't the organized and surveying of the land system. which you would normally have in the old grants. Maybe your farm will be an hour by horse, north, west, south and east, instead of a diagram. But when the English came to the Cape, they implemented a much more advanced system, especially for the surveying of land. And almost the whole of the country, except on certain state land pockets, is surveyed. All land is surveyed. And title deeds refer to a diagram, right, from our Surveyor General's office. And our title deeds, of course, will then all be registered in these offices. We've got 9 across the country. Yeah, so the English system, we still had governors, the grants or the quittance and the freehold grants of those times were still issued by the English governors at the time, and you'll see them still in our these offices.
So you've basically got a system of land registration, Chris. Do you have, I mean, certainly, Stu, this is a big issue for us, isn't it? You know, issues with titles. So Stu, give Chris some examples of the title problems we can come across.
Well, we've had some problems in recent years where you had a connivance between, you know, a crooked person with the assistance of an inside job at a deeds office, right? Or just forgery of signatures, but that is blatant. But obviously you can't get away with that. You know, if they, sooner or later that's caught out and fixed, right? And the person will go to jail in most cases, not all cases, as would happen here.
So
but,
that's good old fraud, Chris. But Stu, give Chris some examples of the title problems that we have, because I think I'm right in saying that you know they're issues that Chris doesn't tend to experience. So off you go.
What do you mean in terms of our actual title itself?
Yeah.
What do you mean?
Certainty of
Well, sort of, well, you know, snafus with breaches of covenant and issues along those lines.
So in terms of what would actually be in our title, yeah, I mean, our title would be split into 3 separate sections. Within those sections, it will detail who owns it, the property, and whether there's any charges on the property. But what we have is historical information that's contained on the title that originates from when it was either first sold, first formed, etc. But we have on there detailed rights of way, details of covenants, both positive, negative. And the issues we have is that we have to investigate that title and the class of title to make sure that what passes from a seller to a buyer is good, and that they're not going to have any problems in the future. So our sort of investigation is highly around the actual title to the property itself.
And to be fair, Chris, we hit upon, you know, a surprising number of issues with the title to land. Either perhaps the seller has breached a covenant, which we tend to get insurance for these days, but you know there are a surprising number of perhaps rights of way that are needed that haven't been granted, or that sort of thing, or the extent of the land isn't perhaps properly denoted. But certainly when we chatted off air, Chris, I got the impression that actually matters of actual title, problems with the title aren't really something you tend to come across. Is that
not
fair?
much. No, I mean you could find a condition not in your current title deed which hides behind a pivot deed, because we first had basically the conditions were just your title deed was made subject to the conditions as referred to in the previous deed, and that would carry on. But then we brought in the pivot system, 1937, I think it is, and all conditions in the title deed, the conditions applicable to a title deed or the servitudes or whatever, since that time will carry everything, will denote everything. And it's only when you still have a reference to the pivot deed that you go behind it and go and look, is there some limitation or restriction and so on. But no, we don't have that much problems with that. I don't think our system is just not old enough to have the kind of things that you have. You will sometimes find there's a problem with the surveying that maybe it's a couple of meters bigger or smaller, with more advanced technology, but not really a big problem. Generally, we don't have that, and we don't take out security of title at all. I know in America it's quite common. Here not. Our system is very secure. We think we have a slow, tedious, but secure system. Right?
It's not slow, Chris. It's definitely not slow. I can promise you.
Well, yeah, I'm happy to say that maybe you guys must come and learn in the colonies how to do your conveyancing.
Yeah, well, I think that's probably what we're trying to promote. I think without any shadow of a doubt, I'd be there like a shot, to be honest. So one of the massive things that we that conveyancers over here have got bogged down with, and Stu, bless him, at the top of a firm, has to deal with this all the time, is when a buyer is contributing their own money towards a transaction over and above what they might be getting by way of mortgage or bond in your case. The anti-money laundering, responsibilities imposed on the lawyers now are huge. I mean, they're absolutely huge in terms of source of funds and source of wealth. So, and that's what, and Stu, take over here. I mean, to give Chris a flavour of how long that might take.
If you go back maybe 20 years ago, when sort of I first started, or 20 plus years ago, you barely looked into any sort of source of funds. You barely looked at the client. Most clients came into the office. But where things have rapidly evolved during that period, we have to be certain now that the client is who they say they are, and we're really susceptible to fraud in that circumstance. We have to also look into the clients and whether they own the property, because again, property fraud is now becoming so big. And of course, money laundering in itself has become such a big part of the conveyancing process, and actually checking people's source of funds to ensure that they've not originated from any criminal activity is now a job that probably, certainly ranks on par with looking at the title. It takes just as long to look into the client and their source of funds as it does now checking out the title to a property. So our investigation into the client can take weeks and weeks, and sometimes the clients don't have the money, they're getting it by way of a gift from somebody else. So our investigation extends to that person, and it can be never ending. So what's it like your end in terms of looking into the client, looking into the money and where it's come from?
Yeah, I mean, similar, but not to that extent. And not, we also feel we waste too much time on doing the bank's jobs and the government's jobs. But we are, I suppose, best placed to do so. And also, I think it justifies our job to a large extent, our involvement. Otherwise, maybe you can just go to an office and push a button and it's from A to B, done. No, we have the same source of wealth, source of funds, identifying the client and the place of residence, making sure that is correct. The funds, if it's over 25,000, I think it is now, in cash, then it gets reported to a financial intelligence center to investigate. The banks do the same. So basically the banks and us do the same job of investigating to a large extent. We do have a lot of also scamming, fraud by hacking of emails and so on. And that's why we, in that case, we have more of that, I think, than actually people, trying to buy when they're not the right person. So the scamming is more prevalent, and that's why we do not accept a change of an account number in various, if not all, practices. Unless the person comes into the office, or in my case, I will do if I know the person well enough, I'll do a Zoom call or a WhatsApp video call to do that. But yeah, we're very careful with that. And either way around, I mean, you can get it from a financial institution who's been hacked, and can have a private Gmail address who's been hacked. So it's generally a thing we are aware of, but it doesn't seem to be as prolific as it is in England.
That's really interesting because I mean, you've just hit the nail on the head there, Chris, actually, because I think it's fair to say, you know, most high street conveyancers in England and Wales, you know, they are not going to be dealing with laundered funds. You're absolutely right. I think the cybercrime, the hacking, the email hacking, what you've described is absolutely stuff that we guard against over here. And again, you know, we mentioned off air, didn't we, the fact that, you know, you will very much check, you know, to whom funds are being sent, and be very, very careful around that. And certainly, you know, Stu and his colleagues and all conveyancers in practice are hugely aware of that issue now. But actually, Chris, what you said there's also interesting. I mean, how much, you know, I sort of get the impression, and I could be wrong, but that the banks actually don't, you know, the banks seem less concerned in many ways about money than lawyers are over here. So would you say the banks are sort of fairly active over there at sort of being involved with source of funds and where people's money comes from?
Yes, and in fact, they can incur penalties from the government if their financial intelligence center documents aren't up to scratch. They have what they call an ADD, enhanced due diligence. They have to complete and repeat on a regular basis with their clients. Despite that, of course, there's still a lot of shenanigans that gets done, as you would have seen in the press. But yeah, they are as much aware and under scrutiny to do the correct thing and do proper investigation and as we are. And so yes, the bank will often, for me to invest a purchaser's deposit with the bank is quite a mission. I mean, normally, if I have a contract which says the purchaser will pay 10% of the deposit within 3 or 7 days, I've got to jump to get that purchaser, you know, get all the necessary documentation. If it's a trust or a company, it's a nightmare. The trustees all have to be, you know, checked. What we call it FICAD, because of the Financial Intelligence Center Act, we refer to FICA. To get that done. And it can actually delay you depositing the client's money in time to get interest from day one.
So Chris, come on, let's cut to the chase. Stu mentioned the, 16 weeks. So how long on average would a conveyancing transaction take with you guys?